See that okay? Please utilize Dr. Graybill. She's in the chat and can navigate some of the technology issues that you might be having, or if you have any questions. I'll be sure that I'll see if I can put the chat box up. I don't think I can. So as you can see, I tried. Dr. Graybill will be the primary person just monitoring the chat, okay? I am going to, I think she started to record, so let's get started. Okay, so this is the Positive Behavior Supports Parent Academy. This is something that we typically do for families with younger children, but we have modified this training so that you guys can also support families during this COVID-19 time. Some general updates that I have mentioned a little bit already. This session will be recorded. We will be sure to share the links to the recordings at a later date. So if for whatever reason, if you're not able to stay the whole time, just know that you will get access to the recording later. We will also hold some additional sessions for parents and for educators at a later date, and we will share that information with you. Office hours will be held, so just know that even though I will just be pretty much lecturing to you today, we are available for some times where you can check in with us and we can help support you and or your families. So those are the dates that we will be available: Thursday, April 23rd from 2 to 3 p.m., Tuesday, April 28th from 2 to 3, and then also Tuesday, May 5th, 2 to 3. And this is going to be via Zoom, so we will make sure to share that information with you guys as well. So today's learning objectives, we want to present the PBIS framework, or Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports.
Jermaine, you went silent.
Can you hear me?
I can hear her.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Jareen.
Okay. So what we want to do is cover the basic PBIS concepts to share with parents, such as understand behavior is communication, learn how to collect ABC data on challenging behavior. You're going to learn some general and function-specific prevention strategies. You're going to learn methods of teaching new skills to replace challenging behavior, and then also learn how to monitor progress. All throughout this session, you will be completing the home-based behavioral, brief behavior questionnaire and intervention plan, better known as the BB QUIP. Okay, so I'm going to refer to it as the BB QUIP moving forward. So just to kind of share how we can use PBIS across settings. Of course, you guys are more familiar with the school-wide PBIS and program-wide PBIS. The difference between PBIS in the home and in the school and program-wide settings is that we are covering the same concepts, but they're just going to be in the home setting. That's all it is. So we want to be sure that we're still having those universal, secondary, and third level levels of support in place, but we can do it at home as well. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but it's sometimes hard to implement some of these things in the home when you're used to doing it at your workplace, but you can definitely use these same strategies. So individualized positive behavior support, or IPBS, is an approach for changing a child's behavior, but of course we want to focus in a more positive way. So we want to base all our strategies and interventions based on understanding that the child is a human, is an individual, and also think about families, their values, and what they want out of their child and their lives. And then also, IPBS is based on research. So if you've probably heard of applied behavior analysis, or ABA. That is the science behind positive behavior support. We want to understand why the child is engaging in the challenging behavior. We don't want to just focus on the behavior itself, because that does not give us the information that we need to change the behavior. We need to understand the why. And we also need to work on teaching the child new skills to replace that challenging behavior. We can't just assume that we can punish a behavior and then that's it. We have to teach the child to behave in more appropriate ways. And then lastly, IPBS is a holistic approach, and we want to consider all the factors that impact not only the child, but the family and the behavior. So this is the framework that we typically follow when we talk about individualized positive behavior support. So first, I mentioned before, we want to understand the behavior. We want to understand what's going on before the behavior, what's triggering that behavior. We also have to understand what's happening after the behavior, because sometimes what we're doing or others are doing as a response to the behavior maybe maintaining it or rewarding it. So we have to pay attention to that as well. So not only do we assess it by asking questions and interviewing parents and others that are close to the child, but we also want to observe what's happening. So we have to put our eyes on it to get a better understanding as to what's happening. So this is what we typically call the functional behavior assessment piece, or an FBA, is where we're just gathering the information and doing the observations so we can have a better understanding as to what's going on before and after. And then we want to get to the why. Why is this behavior happening? Not just the what or what it looks like, but why is it happening? So once we have a better understanding of all those factors, then we can put some really great effective strategies in place based on that function to minimize or prevent the behavior from happening. So this is what we consider that first component of the behavior intervention plan. And then lastly, again, we can't just prevent everything. Not every behavior is going to be preventable in every situation. So we have to be sure that we replace the behavior with something more appropriate. So if we understand that a behavior is happening to get attention, we have to teach the child a new skill or a new way to get attention so that they know there's an alternative way to get their needs met. Usually this is the slide or the framework that we are going to continue to come back to. The understand, prevent, replace, we call that UPR, or we also call it upper, okay? So when we go through all of this process, I'm always going to go back to, this is the part of understanding. We have to understand, and then we'll talk about the prevention and replacement based on that understanding. So just basic research on IPBS. This is effective for all ages of individuals with or without disabilities. And then if you think about ages, it can be as young as 2 or even younger, and then up to 50 or older. So I always say with the UPR, or the understand, prevent, replace, you can apply that framework or that mindset with anyone. You can even do it with your spouse, with your own kids, with your adult kids. So just keep that in mind, that this information that you're learning today does not just apply to our younger kids, but it's also just with anyone. And it's effective for diverse groups of individuals with challenges, and it depends on, well, it doesn't really matter the disability. So you can have an intellectual disability, ODD, autism, EBD, so on and so forth. Or this can also work for typically developing individuals as well. And then you want to note that PBS is the only comprehensive and evidence-based approach to addressing challenging behaviors within a variety of natural settings. So this is very applicable for now because you guys are used to implementing some of these PBIS strategies in the school environment with your students, but now we have to figure out how do we transfer that, those strategies and that framework into the home and help the parents implement the strategies that you've been using in the school. I'm just going to share this video. This is a family that has gone through the PBIS process from beginning to end. So you're going to see some of these videos throughout the session as well as they progressed through the process. So this is where, when they first started, and just describing the behaviors that they have been experiencing as a family.
curious, when we missed out on activities that our family members were having, you felt defeated, depressed?
I felt abandoned by the family. I felt like our family wasn't supporting us, and our entire family was excluded from an event because of our child, and I didn't think that they were helping us to know what to do with our kid. I mean, if anything, we had some pretty tough comments about, well, maybe you should consider an institution. And some of these things are well-meaning. They actually meant well by saying these things about our child, but none of it was really good advice.
I can share a lot of self-pity. You're like, you're kind of like, I can't believe this is what my life was turned into. And it's like, maybe that's what we felt the most, is like, how did this happen? How did we go from where we were, 3 years ago or 4 years ago to where we are today? Now we don't leave our house. So that was kind of the worst feeling.
Other people looked at us like there was something wrong with our parenting skills.
Certainly before PBS, people, you just see it, you go to the grocery store and you have somebody tell you, this is the way you should do it, or, your child's doing that because whatever.
Strangers. Always
supporting them through this time and not necessarily providing strategies based on discipline and judging them for the behaviors that are happening, but really trying to support them through this time, because it is hard. Okay, so this pyramid, you guys are probably familiar with this, and I keep saying that, and if you're not, it's okay, I'm going to go over it. So this is a pyramid to promote social and emotional competence and addressing challenging behavior. So at the bottom of the pyramid is an effective workforce. So we want to make sure, of course, there's systems and policies in place that promote the use of evidence-based practices. So where we're focusing on are these 3 tiers. The universal promotion. So that's for all children, where we call the tier 1 levels of support. So this is, you want to be sure that you are having nurturing relationships with these kids. I know sometimes I've heard, others refer to kids that engage in challenging behavior as the behavior kids, so you want to just be sure that even if they're having some challenges, that you're still building a relationship and being responsive to the behaviors that they're not engaging in, as far as the challenging behaviors that they're not engaging in. So we want to build some positive relationships, and then we want the kids to know that they have a high quality supportive environment. They need to feel safe. They need to feel valued. When children feel that way, they behave a lot better. Now, even if we have even when we have these tier 1 levels of support in place, there will still be some children that need some additional support. So that's where we go to our secondary level, or our tier 2 level of supports. So this is where we'll have some more targeted social emotional supports. So this is where you might read a few books about being a good friend or following directions, why that's important. And I know there's some kid appropriate books that talk about some of those things. So with those 2 levels of supports in place, most children will be successful, but then there's a handful of kids that will still engage in some very significant challenging behaviors. And that's where we increase to that tiered 3 level of support, where we do our intensive intervention. And the difference here is that we are really going in and assessing the behavior. really trying to understand why the behavior is happening and put some individualized behavior support plans in place for those students. Now, the only thing is you're not going to stop giving tiers 1 and 2 levels of support. Those continue to happen, but you just see that we have to put in some more individualized supports in place for this particular child. So for the most part, we're going to be focusing on that tiered 3 level of support and how to do the assessment and put those individualized behavior support plans in place based on that understanding as to why the behavior is happening. You can still follow that understand, prevent, replace framework in tiers 1 and 2 because behavior is behavior. We always need to understand why a behavior is happening. If a child is whining or crying, or a child is talking back. I have a 5th grader, he talks back and he has this little attitude. I don't have to do a full assessment and have a behavior plan in place to put some prevention strategies in place for that and promote some more positive interactions with him. So just keep in mind that understand, prevent, replace can be useful in all tiers, but it's especially important in tier 3 because we have to be sure that we're putting function-based strategies in place for our students. So before we go into the individualized assessment piece, we're just going to talk about some general strategies that you can use for students or kids at home at that tier 1 level. So you want to be able to design an environment that promotes child engagement. So we're going to talk to our parents about what that looks like. So having some great conversations, having that one-on-one time with their child, especially since we are trying to navigate working from home for some, teaching other kids, educators, they're still teaching and their parents. So we're all trying to figure out how can we engage our children at home and work at the same time, okay? We also have to teach those expectations and routines. These things have changed over the last few weeks because of COVID-19. So what are the new expectations? What are the new routines? For myself, I've had to write down what the expectation is. When you wake up, I know right now you're not catching the bus anymore. We're not taking you to school. Someone's unmuted. If you can mute, please. If you're not catching the bus anymore, but you still have to get up and take a shower and eat breakfast, and it's not, you don't just jump right onto electronics because you're not going to school, So we have to be sure we're having those discussions. Teach the skills that children can use in place of challenging behavior. So if they're engaging in significant challenging behavior, or even if it's just those frustrating behaviors that's happening, we can teach skills that are more appropriate so that they don't have to engage in challenging behavior. And then you also want to focus on teaching children what to do. So sometimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, sometimes I get into the no, stop, don't, instead of just telling him, my son, what to do instead. So instead of saying, don't jump on the couch, I can say, keep your feet on the floor, or how about you go play outside? Okay, so you want to give them alternatives to do instead of telling them stop, don't do that, because what can they do instead? So sometimes we have to navigate that interaction a little bit better and guide them to what to do instead of focusing on what we want them to stop doing. And then this one is a hard one, and it's good to start paying attention to the positive to negative ratio. Even comments, like especially with the older kids, they can pick up on our tone sometimes and kind of our snarky remarks. But then for the younger kids, same thing, good job. I like how you're, sitting next to me. I like how you're writing your name. Whatever the case may be, making sure that we are focusing on the good things, at least 5 to 1. So if you find yourself or you find a parent is more focusing on the negative than the positive, try to work on them switching it up. Some families that I've worked with, they're so overwhelmed and frustrated and stressed that all they can do right now is focus on the negative. So sometimes you might have to give them their own interventions and say, well, how about you write down or either write down 5 things that your child did well today, or tell me all the good things that your child is doing today. So start with the positive, start getting them talking about the positive so they can shift their mindset as well. So this is a nice quote. You can't raise positive people in a negative environment, and this not only home, but school, we have to think about just the overall climate. So we want to be sure that we are, as the adults, being positive, that we're being supportive, that we're recognizing the strengths and the good things that our kids are doing. But then we also want to be aware of their struggles, because I think about the struggles that I'm having adjusting to a new routine, a new schedule, this new life right now as an adult. And I can only imagine what our students are feeling, our kids are feeling. Their home is typically a space where they're not doing schoolwork all day, right? They go to school for that. That's the environment for that. But now we have shifted to doing school at home, and mom is my teacher, dad is my teacher, so it's hard for all of us, and we have to just keep that in mind, especially for our little ones as well. And just knowing that being positive and being supportive and having those good conversations and those positive moments creates that positive climate in the home, and it encourages the child to be more compliant. So when you think about just a child that you have a positive interaction with in the school environment, and you can say to another teacher or another person in the school environment that may not have a good interaction or relationship, and you're probably like, I can get that kid to do just about anything, and they're like, he won't listen, he won't do anything, right? So we want to be sure that we're telling our parents your kids are going to be more likely to do what you're asking them to do if you create a positive climate or a positive interaction with them. Giving directions, especially, we're probably giving more directions now than we have before. So we want to be sure that we are giving effective directions. So you want to remove distractions before giving any direction. So that just means you don't necessarily have to have full-blown eye contact from the child. But if they are deeply engaged in a screen or watching TV or playing with their cars, the likelihood that they're going to even hear your instruction is very slim. So we want to be sure that we remove distractions as best as possible without triggering some challenging behavior. We're going to talk about that some more. But just be mindful as to when you are providing directions. Also be mindful of how many directions you are giving. This is important because I know that I laugh because my son gives me so much feedback, and sometimes I feel like a hypocrite because I end up saying, hey, do the dishes, hey, close the refrigerator, hey, do this, hey, put these away. And I'm just spewing out direction after direction, instruction after instruction. And he's like, I did not even finish the first thing you told me to do, So we have to be mindful of that. We also, if there's multiple kids in the home and different ages, thinking about the ways directions are given, and sometimes we may have to individualize that. So some kids can follow the direction, and it's not really a clear, specific instruction. But if you say, okay, time to clean up, some kids can just go ahead and start cleaning up. And giving clear directions, not only being specific, but you want to be aware as an educator, but also thinking about parents. You want to be able to state your instruction versus asking a question. So for example, I could say, hey, put your toys away. That's a statement. That is a direct instruction versus, can you put your toys away? And if I ask the question, then my 11-year-old, who is, very snarky at times, can say no. And because I asked a question, I can't get mad because he's saying, well, no, I can't. So sometimes I catch myself asking questions and I have to rephrase it, or I say, you know what? You're right. I shouldn't have asked. So I'm going to give you a couple more minutes, but in 2 more minutes, I'm going to come back and it's going to be time to clean up. So then I can shift the way that I present my instruction. And then you want to give directions that are positive. So all that means is that you're staying away from that don't do, stop doing that. You want to more say what to do. So sit down, get your pencil out, walk, hold my hand, so you don't want to necessarily, as I say, you don't want to say your instructions in a negative way. When you say directions in a positive way too, it gives you an opportunity to then praise them or acknowledge their following your direction as well. So if I say, hey, come sit at the table, then when he sits at the table, I can say, you know what, I love how you're following my directions. You sat at the table right away, so on and so forth. My son loves that positive feedback, so I make sure that I give that to him as much as possible. You also want to give the child the opportunity to respond. So again, I'm guilty of this a little bit as well, because I will spew off all these different directions and he did not even get an opportunity to follow the first one. So give them some time, but you don't want to give 30 minutes time either. And I'm going to say that I have not been doing a good job with this because I'm picking my battles, especially with being home and working from home and helping him with his schoolwork. I may give a direction and wait 30 minutes and check back in, but I'm finding that that's frustrating me when that direction was not followed. So we are trying to figure out some, and we're 5 weeks into this thing, guys, 5 weeks in, and we're still trying to figure out a routine that works. So when you're talking with families and even with yourself, just give yourself some grace, give your family some grace and just let them know that, this is ideal and this is just things to be aware of, but we're not expecting anyone to be 100% . Also, you want to give choices if you can. So like with the with teaching, the digital learning, virtual learning, I can give my son some choices. So I can say, hey, do you want to work on your math work now, or do you want to do your science work? Right? So I know some of you and some parents are getting a list of things that their child is supposed to do for the day. So giving them choices, instead of me saying, do your math now, and then I get pushback, I can give him choices of which one are you going to do first? And then he can choose which one he wants to do. And then he's more likely to follow that instruction. And then you want to follow through with positive acknowledgement. And I talked about that a little bit earlier. It's important to acknowledge the good things that the kids are doing. And that goes back to that 5 positive to 1 negative, making sure that you're finding opportunities to acknowledge the good things that they're doing throughout the day. So we're going to transition to the BB Quip briefly. So this is an opportunity. We're going to take maybe 2 minutes. Dr. Graybill is going to share the link in the chat so that you guys can click the link. This is going to take you to our online brief behavior questionnaire and intervention plan. I will also be going through it with you a little bit as well, but there's going to be some markers on each slide when we're doing the BB Quip that will tell you where to start and where to end. Just know that this stop here may not be the last question on that page. This is just showing you or orienting you that this is going to be the last page that you complete. But you may have to scroll down and complete maybe 2 or 3 more questions on that page, but then we'll bring it back to the presentation so that we can continue on, because what you're going to do is learn each segment of the BB Quip throughout the training. So don't go ahead, try not to, so that we can all be on the same page and complete this together. So if you have a child in mind, you can definitely go ahead and start completing this BB Quip with, it can be a child that you've worked with in the school. It could be a child that you know you will be supporting at home. You can just give your best guess as you're going through this. You can just kind of go through it just so that you can practice, but make sure you answer all the questions, because at the end, it will pull your answers from each question. So if you did not answer it, then you'll have some blanks, okay? So this is just an example. I'm gonna give y'all 2 minutes. I'll open it as well so you can see. Hopefully it goes to where I was. Okay, so I started it so I can do this with you. So this is the stop page that I'm at, but I can show you that I've completed all of these questions. And the reason why we have this section, this is to say that the child is not his or her behavior. So we want to be sure that we're focusing on who the child is as a person, right? So who is this child? How old are they? Are they receiving services? Okay, if not, you can select no. But just go through and answer as best as possible some information, some background information about the student. I'm just going to say here, since I'm on this slide or this page, here you want to list the preferred items, activities, or situations that that child enjoys the most. This is stuff that you can list some more things here, but these are things that are activities and items that you could use to pair yourself or promote a positive interaction. So if I know that this child loves playing on the tablet and building Legos, I'm going to try to connect with them with the things that they like. And then I'm going to try to avoid doing the things that the child doesn't like, because I don't want to create a negative interaction. Okay? So that's the purpose of this. And then we need to know how the child is communicating. So this particular child speaks in sentences and gets things for himself. Okay, I'm checking chat for a second just to be sure I'm on the same page. You guys got the link. I'm gonna just give it 1 more minute. And just be sure you stop on this slide and we'll continue. Or on this page. Since I'm looking at the chat, does anyone have any questions while we're waiting for about 30 more seconds? Everybody okay? Following me okay? Not on page to answer survey. Lisa, do you want to unmute for a second? I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. It's okay if you watch and not do the questionnaire. Yes, it is, Gregory.
Hello.
Is this Lisa?
Yes.
What's going on, Lisa?
Are we supposed to be answering the questions, or because I was following what you were doing and I got off the page?
Yeah, so if you click that link, you can follow along and complete the survey along with me. So I'm just modeling it for you on the page, but you can definitely fill this out for your own student or your own child or whoever, so you can get practice with filling it out. But I'm going to be modeling it for you guys as well.
Okay, that's what I was saying. The page, that link that she had up highlighted,
Yes.
I'm not on that page anymore since you brought up your thing. So I was trying to get back to that.
Okay, no worries. And then if you see, because I'm sharing my screen, so if you minimize it, you might be able to get back to your internet browser. So it's just about navigating, minimizing my screen or the Zoom so that you can see your internet browser.
Okay, thank you.
And no problem, Lisa. Thanks for unmuting. And then will there be access after the training? Yes, this is a resource that you guys are able to use.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint. Let's see if I can do this seamlessly. Okay. All right, so understanding behavior as communication. So this is where we're gonna get into talking about the behavior. And just be sure you mute your mic. So again, remember I told you I'm going to be referring to this process throughout the training. So we're focusing on the first piece of understand. So behavior is communication. Again, we're not focusing on primarily what the behavior looks like. That is important. We need to know what the behavior is, but we also need to really focus on, okay, why is the behavior happening? So children communicate in many different ways. So, and not just children, just individuals in general, right? So we communicate using words. We also use sentences. Some individuals may have to point to a picture or use a device. Some kids may just stare at something, right? And you know they're staring at it, and that means that they want it just from them staring. So that's something to consider. They might pull you, you know, so thinking about, you know, when you're working with your parents, you ask them, like, how does your child communicate? And if they just say, well, they're not vocal, well, even though they're not vocal or not talking, they're still communicating in different ways. So we want to be sure that we're paying attention to those things. And some kids may engage in challenging behavior by crying, biting, throwing tantrums. So there's all different ways that we communicate. But then we also communicate a variety of different messages. So we may want to request a certain object, activity, person. We may communicate that I don't want to do this certain instruction, or I don't want to do this activity. I might communicate that I need help or I need your attention. I may also be communicating through my behavior that this feels good to me, that I just enjoy doing this behavior. Here's another video. Again, this is the family that we saw earlier. And this is the child that has been engaging in some of the challenging behaviors at home. So we're just gonna watch this. And I want you guys to think about what the child may be communicating through his behavior.
Jareen, can I pause before you
Yeah.
get started? Sorry, this is Emily. Tiffany, I see that you've got your hand raised. Did you have a question?
I did have a question, but she answered it.
Perfect.
And now I didn't know how to unraise my hand.
Okay, I'll lower it for you. Okay,
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna hit play on the video. Oh, sorry. Try that again. Oh. So I know when I see that, I cringe every single time, no matter how many times I've seen this video. And I think a lot of us can either relate from past experiences, know some kids that engage in some of these behaviors in the school environment, but then also we're supporting families that may have these challenges. So we're gonna try a poll. Dr. Graybill, if you wanted take a stab at it. Yes. So if you could, what do you think the function of the child's behavior is in this example? We haven't talked about function just yet, but I want to see, what do you guys think the child is communicating through this behavior?
Got about 30 more seconds for the poll to remain open. Got about 55% of you all who have responded.
And just take your best guess. If you're not sure, it's okay. Just your best guess.
About 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now.
Great. Are you able to share those results? Excellent. So as you can see, some of you guys, most of you guys said escape, some said attention, and some said sensory. So what we're going to do a little bit later, we are going to talk about functions in more detail. But in this example, yes, the child is more communicating escape as a function. So I don't want to go into the library. I don't want to do this. I don't want you to hold my hand. So he's communicating a lot of escape. I don't want. So that falls under the escape category. All right, so challenging behavior communicates. So challenging behavior is communicating some sort of message when a child does not have either the language or skills to communicate his or her needs more appropriately. Also, a child who has limited social skills has learned that challenging behavior may result in their needs getting met. But then you have to think about, there's kids that have the language, right? Are completely vocal, but still may engage in some challenging behavior. And it could just be because they learned that the challenging behavior works more often than the appropriate behavior. I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself, but the point I'm trying to make here is that sometimes we as parents, educators, so on and so forth, sometimes we ignore the appropriate behaviors that our child is engaging in, and then we immediately respond when challenging behavior happens. So again, it's increasing the awareness, because I am completely guilty of this, and my son knows how to push my buttons, and I react every single time. But if he says, "Excuse me, mom," sometimes I might be like, "Okay, wait, let me finish this. But then as soon as he's like, "Ah," then I'm like, "Why are you yelling?" Right? Sound familiar? I do it, and I'm a behavior specialist, right? Because it's hard when it's your own. It's hard when you're in it, in the situation, but I am completely aware that I am reinforcing that behavior, and I find ways to make sure that I limit that over time, because no one is perfect. We're all human. So challenging behavior. So sometimes we have behaviors that are significantly challenging, right? So it's any repeated pattern of behavior that interferes with learning or engagement in pro-social interactions with peers and adults. But we also have that behaviors, challenging behaviors, are not responsive to the use of developmentally appropriate guidance procedures. So when it comes to challenging behavior, we have to prioritize, because sometimes kids are engaging in some behaviors like that are frustrating, that are irritating, annoying, overwhelming, right? But they're not challenging, right? It's not that it's a repeated pattern of behavior. It's not that it's interfering with learning. But if it's repeated in a way that it is so frustrating that you don't have friends because you're engaging in this behavior, that's when we can consider it more challenging. Or if you say you try to do your tier 1 levels of support, or even your tier 2, and have those conversations, and you read the books and you share articles, whatever, and they're still engaging in the behavior, that's when we can consider it more challenging. But just an irritating behavior that's frustrating right now is not necessarily a challenging behavior. So we want to be sure that we're prioritizing and making it clear what a challenging behavior is that we're going to do this whole process for, because it's a lot of work to put in to do a whole intervention plan for a child for a behavior that's frustrating and does not happen very often. And then challenging behavior happens because it does work. So that's where I was kind of alluding to there, where I engage in appropriate behaviors and sometimes I'm ignored, or sometimes I get a, oh, good job, you know, very neutral, flat acknowledgement. But if I engage in this challenging behavior, then I get full eye contact. You are in my face. You are reprimanding me. You pull me to the side, right? So you have to think about how are you responding to the challenging behavior compared to the appropriate behavior and what that child is learning, okay? But challenging behavior typically results in the child gaining access to something or someone, or trying to avoid something or someone. So here's some examples of challenging behaviors. Some of these may be some behaviors that you are experiencing or families are experiencing, and some may not have made this list, but these are some things that we consider like considerably challenging, like property destruction, not following directions to the point where it's affecting learning. That is a major issue, right? Running away. We have some families talking about, like, my child will dart off in public and, you know, I have to chase after them, or they might run into the street. They put things in their mouth. They're eating things that they're not supposed to. These are all things that may be challenging. I have repetitive behaviors here. Repetitive behaviors, you know, you might have heard them as like stereotypy or something along those lines. Again, it depends on the how challenging is it? Is it impeding the learning of that student? Is it causing them to not have pro-social interactions because they're so engaged in this repetitive behavior? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But just know, because a child is engaging in vocal stems or stereotypy doesn't mean that it's a challenging behavior. It's only if it's really impeding the learning of themselves or others, or causing some disruptions in the home. So the first thing that we need to do when we figure out the behavior that we want to target, we have to define it. We have to just be sure that we're talking about the behavior the same way. So defining it just means that we think about all the observable and measurable behaviors that we see this individual doing. It must be objective, clear, and complete. So all that means is, when you say observable and measurable, I can see the behavior happening. I can see or hear the behavior. I can hear a scream. I can see a hit. I can see this tantrum right now, but even tantrum is not very observable or measurable because it needs to be more individualized. What does a tantrum look like for my 11-year-old child versus a student that is 4 years old? That's going to look very different, but we can both call it a tantrum. But my son's tantrum will be very different from a 4-year-old's tantrum. So we want to just be sure that we're all talking about it the same way, especially since you guys are going to be supporting families. You want to be sure that you're not just talking about, my child is acting up. Okay, so what does that look like, right? What is the child doing that you're saying that they're acting up, right? So it's just not necessarily having like a full-blown operational definition. We'll have some practice with that shortly, but just being sure that if a parent is saying they're so frustrating, they're you know, they're acting up, they're throwing a fit every day, they just don't want to do anything, you know, really asking them, well, what does that look like? What are they doing? And then have them describe more what the behavior looks like. So here's some examples. Like a tantrum. Even a tantrum, again, is not clear. How can we define it a little bit more? So what does your son's tantrum look like? well, that he falls to the floor, he kicks his legs, he screams, and he's crying. And usually I consider it a tantrum when this happens longer than a minute, because sometimes he'll just fall to the floor and do all these things in the last 5 seconds, and I don't consider it a tantrum. But if it's longer than a minute, then yeah, it's becoming disruptive. Okay, so now that we have that understanding of what that tantrum looks like, anytime that behavior happens, we can be sure that we are observing what's happening before and after that particular behavior, and then so that we can better understand and get to the function of the behavior. But if we just say tantrums and we're trying to, and my definition of tantrum is different from the parent's definition, then we're not going to be looking at the same behaviors, and we're not going to be on the same page, and it's just going to be all over the place. Okay. Another example, doesn't follow directions. So saying no, I don't want to. A child can just fold their arms, right, and go, that can be their not following directions. Okay. Saying not now to any request, falling to the floor, kicking, screaming, throwing items across the room, or what's one, swiping the materials off the table, right? If they're doing digital learning, they might close the device, right? I'm not doing this. So you just have to think about, well, what is the child doing when they're not following directions? So I have some examples here. I don't have a poll for this, but does anyone want to take a stab at, well, I want you guys, there's like 30 of you. So whoever wants to, just in the chat, just type up some examples of aggression or hyperactive behavior, but use observable and measurable terms. So you want to tell me, what does the behavior look like? Another thing that I didn't mention about defining behavior, as you guys are thinking, be sure to not include emotions in there. It's not that emotions and feelings are not important, but that's subjective as well. So angry, frustrated, those types of terms, you don't want to necessarily include in your definition, because what does that look like? Again, just what are the behaviors that's happening? Excellent. So I see hitting, biting himself, others, pulling items from a friend's hand. Excellent. Pulling hair. Good job. Knocking papers off desks, growling. This leads to hitting and pushing. That's a good example. So we talk about precursor behaviors too, and we're going to talk about prioritizing behaviors in the next slide. This is important because sometimes hitting and pushing might be the most challenging behavior, but you might see that knocking papers off the desk and growling happens every time before hitting and pushing happens. So I would target the knocking papers off desk and growling, even though it's not as challenging as hitting and pushing, because if I can start to identify what's happening before and after the knocking papers off the desk and growling, then I can put an intervention in place before having to deal with the hitting and pushing. So Rebecca, thank you for that example. Extra aggression toward a male or female. So that needs to be a little bit more defined. What does extra aggression look like? Aggressive may be shoving desk or kicking chair. Excellent. Head banging. Yes, Gregory. Throwing objects in the direction of other students. Y'all are doing great. Those are great, great, great examples. Excellent. So we're going to move on to the BB Quip. So again, if you guys are not doing it yourselves, that's okay. I'm going to go to mine so you guys can follow along. But you're going to start on the next page, and then we're going to stop on the page that starts with, how do you know this? Okay, so let me get to my BB Quip. Okay, so that's where we stopped off, right? So we're going to go next. So please click the challenging behaviors that JS is engaging in and drag the behaviors into the appropriate box. So this is kind of where we were going with the precursors. So I might say cursing is moderately problematic because it doesn't happen that often, but it's happening, right? Crying, it happens. moderately, right? Yelling and screaming, moderately. So you can kind of rank what you feel is slightly problematic, moderately, or very. But what I'm going to focus on, the question that's asking here is, write the one behavior from your selections above that will be the focus of the plan. So we select one behavior because it is overwhelming. If I'm trying to target all of these behaviors, all 5 of these behaviors at once and take data and all that stuff, that is not gonna work, right? It's gonna be overwhelming, it's gonna be too much. So I wanna be sure that I select the behavior that I want to focus on. And prioritizing is going, you wanna think about how often does the behavior happen, how intense is the behavior, you know, if it happens, like if physically hurting himself happens once a month, I may not focus on that, you know, but cursing happens every single day. So I'm gonna say physically hurting himself because that happens very often. And then here, you don't necessarily have to write the examples that are here. You can be more specific. So this is where you kind of define it. So I'm gonna say hitting his head with his hand. All right, so that kind of defines what does physically hurting himself look like. I have a question. In the case of hyperactivity as defined, is unable to stay focused specific enough, or would there be a need for something more observable? I would go with the latter. Just try to figure out, yeah, Emily, Dr. Grable, you're on it. You wanna be more specific. So even if you have hyperactivity here, what does that look like? Running around, and just know that there is an other. So if there's something that's not on this list, it's okay. Do not feel like you are just limited to this list. You can type in what it is that's happening with the student specifically, because it might be something very unique to that particular child. And you can type in exactly what the behavior looks like. Just make sure that whatever you put here, you put that one behavior that you're focusing on this line, right? So hitting head with his hand. So why did you select hitting his head with his hand? I'm gonna say because it is harmful to the child and it is getting worse. All right, we're gonna keep going. So which of the following is most concerning about the behavior? So we're getting some baseline information here, all right? Is it how many times hitting his head with his hand occurs? Is the frequency, or is it more the duration, how long it's lasting? And I would say it's how many times it's happening. So hitting his head with his hand occurs how many times? It occurs hourly. All right, so don't follow mine. This is my model. Make sure you're answering based on the understanding that you have with the child that you're working with. And I would say he is hitting his head at least 1 to 5 times an hour. That's a lot. And how do I know this? I know this because it is my best guess. I have not taken actual data just yet, or since you're working with families, I'm gonna say that it's based on conversations with those most familiar with the child, okay? So remember, that was our stopping point, so stop there. I'm gonna give you guys maybe 30 more seconds to just fill that out. If you didn't follow along, I know I was probably going fast. All right, so I'm gonna move forward. So this is just to sum it up. All behavior is communication. A few minutes of listening, observing, and understanding can save hours of miscommunication, frustration, and conflict. A need met is a problem solved. And when I think about this, I also think about like the FBA BIP process in the school environment. And sometimes, again, just doing that basic understand, prevent, replace, thinking, having that mindset, even at levels 1 and 2 tiers, then you can save yourself days and weeks of data collection and everything at tier 3 if you're able to understand and prevent some of these behaviors at levels 1 and 2. All right, so here's the family again. talking about just communication and understanding behavior.
When we went out anywhere, just going out.
Every time I click, I'm sorry guys, I will not try to click to answer anything in the chat. Sorry.
Just decided to stay home because it was easier, or taking turns going out, or I wait for you to come home from work. And
we couldn't even go in and out of Publix or Walmart because we couldn't get through the door without having a tantrum. Or certainly couldn't go to a restaurant and sit down and have dinner for a half hour. Just simple everyday life things.
We became isolated, not even eating dinner at home or giving the kids baths or simple things at home. So we ended up just developing routines around Brenton, and that was what we did. You know? I think everybody revolved around him.
I guess what made Brennan tough before PBS was that we had no way to communicate with him. We didn't know what he wanted. He was frustrated. We were frustrated. And it was just a lack of communication of understanding why he was doing what he was doing, and then how to resolve it. That's probably what made it the toughest for me, because she just didn't know just how to communicate with him.
I think it was so hard when he would just fall down, and I had to carry him in places, carry him out of places. We were spectacles. People just watched us. They judged us.
So when I hear that, I think about, again, that importance of just understanding the why behind the behavior. We can always get caught up in what the behavior is. That child is aggressive, or he is cursing up a storm, or he just has a bad attitude. Yeah, okay, but what else? You know, what else can we do about that? Why is that happening? What can we do? And I think when we start understanding, we build that empowerment, because if you understand it, then you feel you have the tools to put in place some strategies to prevent it, to change that behavior. And that's the empowerment piece, is that lack of understanding that makes parents feel kind of at a loss, because they're just focusing on, my child is tantruming 45 minutes every single day, multiple times a day, but that doesn't give them any tools to work with. So always try to make sure that we're focusing on the functions of the behavior, which we're going to talk about right now, right? So why is the behavior occurring? What is the purpose behind the behavior? What is this individual, what is the child trying to communicate through this behavior? So these are the 4 common functions of behavior. And a hint to remembering the 4 functions is everybody eats, the EATS. So first is escape, but we also say avoid as well. So you usually will see escape and avoidance kind of go hand in hand. Attention is the A, tangible, sensory. So I'm going to show a little graph or chart, and we'll just talk about these in a little bit more detail, okay? So first, escape. What does this do for me? When I engage in a challenging behavior, and it's not just challenging behavior, guys, we all communicate through behaviors, one of these 4 functions. So if you guys got into this presentation and started hearing what we're gonna go over and hearing about PBIS, and you're like, oh, I already know this, I don't need to be here, you will click leave the meeting, and you would engage in behaviors to escape or avoid this particular presentation, right? So our kids might engage in some challenging behaviors to say, I don't wanna do this, I don't wanna be around this person, this is too hard for me, I don't wanna do this, I wanna avoid it altogether. And I've learned that these behaviors gets me out of these different activities or situations, right? But when we think about escape in a more positive way, we have to think about that replacement piece. So not only do they engage in the challenging behavior to escape, we're gonna have to teach them a different behavior, more appropriate age appropriate, developmentally appropriate behavior to engage in to escape, because that need is still there, but we just have to teach them what can you do instead, all right? Then attention, I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. The behavior is occurring to get your attention. So if you wanted to get my attention, you might raise your hand in the chat, right? Or you might chat something and that will get my attention because now I have it pulled up so I can see it. So that's how you would get my attention here. Kids might get your attention by yelling, screaming, pulling on your arm, tapping you on the shoulder, saying, excuse me, mommy, daddy, can you look at me? You're not paying attention to me, okay? So those are all different things, behaviors and sayings that children can engage in to get your attention. But you can also give attention by reacting. And this is where my son gets me all the time. Because if I just do a deep sigh, then he is like, oop, I got her, I got a reaction. She responded, it affected her. And as he gets older, when he was younger, I didn't get it. You know, I got it, but I didn't. But as he's older, he's able to verbalize that a lot more. So when you think about the kids that you're working with and even the parents that you're supporting, sometimes you can ask the kids, you know, sometimes we do, like, why are you doing this? Not in the moment, you know, that's a little bit harder. But sometimes if we listen and pay attention, we can hear the why behind some of the behaviors that's happening. And then tangible, that is, I'm engaging in this behavior to get access to my preferred items or activities. So just know that access can be terminated, denied, or delayed. So if I'm terminating access to something, that means the child already has that item. So I think about screen time for our younger kids. Think about toys. They're playing in the playroom, right? And then you say, it's time to come eat, time to take a bath, time to do your digital learning lessons, right? And because they don't want to stop playing, they might start engaging in the behavior. So say a kid loves bath time and you say, stop playing with your Legos to come take a bath. It's not that they don't want to take a bath, it's that they don't want to stop playing with Legos. Or it could be a combination of the two. So they could be playing with Legos. You say, come do your digital learning lessons. One, I don't want to stop engaging in my toy play. I want to play with my Legos. So that's tangible. But then I also don't want to do these digital learning lessons. So I want to escape or avoid that activity. So if it's a combination of the two, you have to be creative. And we'll talk about the prevention shortly. Just be creative on how you navigate that transition because it's a transition issue, right? Tangible, not only terminated, but delayed. So wait, you have to wait to get access to it. Like, yes, you can watch TV, but you have to wait 1 more hour. And then a behavior may happen to communicate, well, I want it now. You're telling me to wait and I don't want to wait. And then delayed, denied is the last one. So denied is no, you cannot watch TV. No, you cannot have the 5th snack in the house because I just went grocery shopping and you're gonna eat all the snacks. No, you just had 4 snacks, right? And that can trigger some challenging behavior. So just think about what's happening right now with COVID. And I know I see my friends posting a lot about, you know, have your school stomach or whatever, right? I don't know if it's a meme out there, but you don't eat 4 to 5 snacks at school. So why are you doing that at home? And that again goes back to, if you know that that's going to trigger some challenging behavior, we have to put some things in place to try to prevent that, all right? And then sensory. Sensory can be a little bit confusing, but the biggest thing with sensory is that the behavior itself is enjoyable. I like to do this behavior. So I play with my hair. I like to twirl my hair, twirl it around my fingers and all that stuff. So that behavior of twirling my hair is sensory. I would twirl my hair whether you guys were here or not. Because you can't see me, I can be twirling the mess out of my hair and you guys don't even know it. And that is sensory. I don't want your attention. I'm not escaping anything. I'm not getting access to anything. I just enjoy engaging in this behavior. Some people bite their nails. Some kids do the hand flapping. Some do the vocal stems. Just because it looks sensory does not mean that that behavior is sensory. So a child can learn. I'm gonna use my son as an example again. He bites his nails and it drives me nuts. And he loves to get a reaction out of me. So that's the attention piece, right? So he engages in the nail biting as a sensory seeking behavior sometimes, where he will be in his room biting his nails and I walk in and I'm like, oh my gosh, why are you biting your nails? Big reaction, right? So he has learned, ooh, when I bite my nails, my mom gives me a big reaction. I get a lot of attention for it. So when he's in his room by himself, biting his nails, it is sensory. But when he's next to me at the table and I may be busy doing something and I see him chewing his nails or he's looking at me as he's chewing his nails, then I know, oh, he is just doing that to get a reaction out of me. And what am I going to do? Be a bad behavior specialist and give a reaction? But what I should do is just pretend it's not happening. Sometimes I pretend it doesn't happen and sometimes I react. It just depends on how I'm feeling that day. And we have to understand that's human nature. We're not going to be perfect, but it's increasing the awareness and giving you the tools to feel like, I understand what's happening right now and I'm choosing to reinforce it just because I'm kind of over it, but I understand that that's what I'm doing, okay? Any questions? I'm gonna open this up for questions in the chat because functions are important. You have to understand these. Any questions about any of these functions? And Rebecca, I love the visual too. Feel free to unmute or you can type it in chat. I'm gonna give a few more seconds, maybe 15 seconds for any questions. Okay, I'm gonna assume that there's no questions. We're gonna keep going. All right, so the ABCs of behavior, this is your antecedent behavior consequence. If you're not familiar with these terms, we're gonna talk about it in more detail, of course. So A is for antecedent or trigger. So now there's two types of triggers that we usually talk about. There's one that's the slow trigger. So the slow trigger is what we describe as what sets the stage, what typically is going on that will make the behavior more likely to occur. So for example, if I'm hungry or tired as an individual, I know that I'm going to be a little bit more snappy or short with people. So those will be my behaviors that occur because I'm hungry and I'm tired, right? Or if it's around nap time. So if a child takes a nap, usually around 12 or 1 o'clock, and for whatever reason they're going past that time, you can say that's kind of a slow trigger, like, oh, they skipped their nap today. So I know the likelihood of some tantrums occurring is higher because they did not nap. Again, that's your slow triggers. You're just kind of understanding what's happening before, not the antecedent just yet, but more about what's setting the stage. Another example is the context. I know for whatever reason, when we're in Walmart, this is when the behavior happens most often. Or when we are in the bathroom, that's when the behavior happens more often. Or in the school environment. What's the difference when the child is with their primary teacher versus when there's a substitute, right? A substitute teacher in a classroom is a slow trigger. You know that for all the kids, behaviors are more likely to occur because that substitute is there, right? That's slow trigger. The fast trigger or the antecedent is that immediate event or situation that happens right before the behavior that triggers the behavior to occur, right? So is that you gave an instruction, you took something away, you said, time to do your digital learning lessons. That's all you said. and all of a sudden this child is rolling on the floor, screaming and kicking, right? That's your antecedent. What's happening immediately before the behavior? What triggered it in that moment? The slow trigger or the context is more of they didn't sleep well last night, they're hungry, it's past their bedtime, it's past nap time, things like that, all right? And then you also, when you're thinking about antecedents, you have to think about where is it happening, when does it happen, and who is this behavior happening with most often or not with as well. Because if you see that with dad, when dad is giving the instructions, the behaviors don't happen, but when mom gives the instructions, that's when the behaviors occur. What's going on? What's the difference between mom and dad giving instructions? And that's where you kind of dig a little deeper to figure out what's going on, how does dad interact versus mom interact? How can we get mom doing what dad's doing so the behavior is less likely to occur with her? So again, this is the understanding piece, and that's why we have to do the ABCs to get a better understanding of what's happening right before and pay attention to these things. So then when you talk about the prevention piece, you can start modifying those little things that you've observed. Then of course the behavior is, what does the behavior look like? Remember, observable, measurable, how long does it last? How many times is it happening, all right? And then lastly is your consequence or outcome, or we can say the response to the behavior. How do people, whether it's adults or other kids, respond to the behavior when it occurs? What's happening before, or what's happening after the behavior? Sometimes when we think of consequence, that term, we think about the discipline and the punishment, and we just think about the negative things that happen after behavior. But just know that this applies to positive behavior as well. Antecedent could be something good, and the behavior is an appropriate behavior, and the consequence is praise or getting access to the things that they want. So just know that this 3-term contingency applies to not only challenging behavior, but to all behaviors, all right? This ABC helps you to better conclude or hypothesize the function of a behavior. So we're gonna practice that a little bit. When you see what's happening before and after behavior, you can make a better prediction as to why the behavior is happening or what the child is communicating. So we're gonna practice that with some polls on this next slide, okay? So just remember, the functions of behavior is everybody eats, EATS, escape, attention, tangible, sensory, okay? All right, so let's look at antecedent behavior consequence. Parent asks child to sit down on the floor. The child sits down. Parent says, great job following directions. So let's do a little poll there, and I want you guys to think about what could the child be communicating, or what is the function of the behavior of the child sitting? I'm gonna try it out, Dr. Graybill. Can y'all see that? What is the function of the child's behavior in this example? Excellent, thank you. I see one person has voted. And this is a little bit harder because we focus so much on the challenging behavior and trying to figure out the function of a challenging behavior, but we have to think about appropriate behaviors also have a function. And we usually look at what's typically the consequence. How do we usually respond to the behavior? What's maintaining the behavior? Take your best guess. I'm gonna give you guys 15 more seconds. All right, I'm ending the polling now. Okay, So I'm gonna share the results with you guys. So most of you guys said attention, some of you said tangible, and some said sensory. So with the parent asking the child to sit down on the floor and the child sits down, the consequence kind of leads us to what the function may be. So now it's hard. I'm gonna say it is not best practice to try to hypothesize function after one data point. So just know that this is just overall practice for function, and you have to have more data points, especially if it's not clear what the function of the child's behavior is, to really conclude or hypothesize the function a little bit better. But based on the consequence here, we can say that the child is more engaging in the sitting down to get attention. They like to get that positive praise. All right, so good job. All right, so let's do the next one. I'm gonna give about 30 seconds for, I'm gonna end it for a second so you guys have an opportunity to read it. Child sees a McDonald's sign while riding in the car. Child begins to kick and scream. And then the consequence is parent gets the child McDonald's. So think about everybody eats, and what do you think the function of this behavior is in this example? I'm giving 30 seconds. Best guess. All right, so let me share the results for this one. So most of you guys did say tangible. Tangible, yes, because the child is seeing the McDonald's and they kick and scream, and then mom typically responds by getting the McDonald's. So the child has learned that the kicking and screaming is their way of communicating, I want McDonald's, take me to McDonald's. And the parent has learned as well that that's their child's way of communicating that, right? So they know, oh, okay, you want McDonald's, let me go get it for you. So this is where the understand, prevent, replace comes in, right? So if I understand this and this continues to happen, instead of just getting McDonald's after they kick and scream, I have to teach my child a different way to get McDonald's. I can't keep giving them this tangible reinforcer for the challenging behavior, because they will continue to kick and scream when they want things. And it's not just McDonald's, it's gonna be for other things. So we have to be sure that we are teaching our parents to start thinking this way. And it's not that they're wrong, it's not that we're judging them, it's more about their awareness of what's happening. Because even my friends with a younger child, I see her try to not give in to an appropriate behavior, but then as soon as she's like, that's when she gets it. And I'm like, ooh, okay, let's talk about this. But we have to be careful with giving advice, right? So if you have parents that are open to it and wanting the support, then we can definitely try to guide them in the right direction, okay? All right, so it is noon and the child has not eaten breakfast, or has not eaten since breakfast, excuse me. Child goes and stands in front of the refrigerator, and then the parent presents the child with food options. So I'm gonna relaunch. You have 30 seconds. What is the function of this behavior? All right, I'm ending polling now. All right, so we had a lot of mixed reviews on this one, right? So let's see what's happening here. It is noon and the child has not eaten since breakfast. So the slow trigger is they're hungry and they're probably gonna be looking for food, right? So the child goes and stands in front of the refrigerator. So they are standing in front of the refrigerator and the parent understands, okay, my child wants something to eat, right? So parent may not remember that they haven't eaten since breakfast or whatnot, but they have learned, okay, when my child stands in front of the refrigerator, that's a clue to me. Oh, do you want something? Okay, here. Do you want applesauce? Do you want yogurt? Do you want a sandwich? Whatever the case may be. So they're giving out a list of things, of tangible items for this child to have access to. So it ends up being more of a tangible reinforcer. So think about if this child was vocal, it's noon and the child has not eaten since breakfast. Mom, can I have a Pop-Tart? Right? And then the parent says, sure, you can have a Pop-Tart. That's tangible, okay? So always just think about, if I could put words in this child's mouth in this example, what would they be saying? What would they be communicating? All right? So let's do the next one. Child is alone in her room. Child begins jumping on the bed. Child remains alone in her room and continues to jump on the bed. What do you guys think the function of this behavior is? Yes, yes, yes. All right, 10 more seconds. All right, so you guys, most of you have said sensory. So it's sensory because she is alone, she begins jumping on the bed, and she remains alone. So she is going to engage in this behavior whether someone is in that room or not, because she enjoys jumping on the bed. Now I can see where you guys would say attention, but the only way we could really say it's attention if the consequence was different. If we said that most of the time when she's jumping on the bed, the parent comes running in and says, stop jumping on the bed, what are you doing, right? That would be more of, we could say it's attention, because the child has learned, if I'm alone and I jump on the bed but I want mom's attention, I know jumping on the bed is going to result in mom coming in and saying something or reprimanding, so on and so forth. So you always have to look at both the antecedent and the consequence. And again, that's why we cannot conclude function based on one data point. But if say that this is the consequence that happens most often and results in the behavior continuing to occur, then we can say, okay, this is sensory, or this is attention, or escape, so on and so forth. All right. And just know, again, the function's a little bit harder, especially if this is new for you. And we have our office hours. So if you need more examples, if you have questions, you can email, but you can also check in with us during those office hours for more clarification on these. All right, last one. Parent announces that it's bath time. So time to take your bath. And then the child's like, whoop, runs off and hides. And then mom or dad says, you know what? I'm not even gonna chase him. I'm gonna wait till later. All right, what is the function of the behavior in this example? What is the child communicating by taking off and running and hiding when mom says, it's bath time? Excellent. Excellent. 5 more seconds, if anyone else. All right. We got 100% agreement on this one. It's definitely escape. So that one is like an easy one to really identify. These other ones, again, we can discuss this more like via email and stuff like that, but just know that the functions of behavior, they're either communicating, I don't want to do this, or I want access to something, or I need your attention, or this is fun, I love doing this. All right, so we'll get some more practice with this too. So children may exhibit what may look like the exact same problem behavior, but for very different reasons. So John's toy is taken away is the antecedent. He hits and the toy is given. A demand is placed on Gabrielle and she hits, but the work is removed. And then Dana is being ignored and she hits and attention is delivered. So as you can see, it's all the same behavior. So that's why we can't really focus on what the behavior is. We have to look at what's going on before and after the behavior to determine the function. So the first one would be tangible, right? I took the toy away, he hit me, and I gave it back to him. Not saying that that's the right thing to do, but it happens, right? I said to do something, she hit, and the work was removed. Maybe she went to a timeout or something, right? Or Dana's being ignored, so she's not getting the attention, so she hits me and I give her attention, okay? So these are 3 different functions happening right now, but it's all the same behavior. And just know it could be the same kid too. So it could be John, John's toy is taken away and a demand is placed on John, and John is being ignored, and he could hit in all these different situations for different reasons. So that is why you guys have to practice that ABC data collection and really pay attention to what's happening before and after so that you can determine function. On the other hand, children may exhibit different behaviors for the exact same reason. So these are different behaviors happening here, but these are different reasons. So Mike is instructed to put away his toys. He bites his sibling, so he is sent to timeout. Elena is told to wipe the kitchen table. She runs to her room, and Dad lets her stay in her room to calm down. Marcia is asked to complete a puzzle, and she throws the pieces. And she's told to clean up, right? So even though you're placing another demand here, she's trying to escape completing the puzzle. So I would rather clean up the puzzle pieces than do the actual puzzle, okay? So paying attention to those things as well. All right, so here's an activity. I'm gonna do the polling again. So what is the child communicating? So when you're looking at these, I want you guys to describe the triggers. So more the antecedent, what's happening right before the behavior, what is the behavior, and what were the consequences or responses. Then you're going to tell me what does the child appear to be communicating through their behavior, and then identify the function. So this is all in poll. We're gonna try it out, all right? But I'm gonna do the first one for you so you can kind of get an idea as to what I'm looking for. So for here, when I look at this scenario, the A, the antecedent, I would say mom tells the child to go to bed. The B, what's the behavior? The child is waving her arms and is screaming, okay? So I'm just, what is happening right before, what is the behavior, and then what's the consequence? What's happening after the behavior? The child is sitting on the couch next to mom watching TV, okay? So when you're collecting ABC data, you want to be sure that you're describing the antecedent behavior and consequence as specifically as possible. So you don't want to just say, mom gave an instruction, right? Because that doesn't give us enough detail to know what exactly is happening or what that trigger was. So we want to focus more on mom said, go to bed. Mom said, time to brush your teeth. Dad took the toy away. Grandma was busy on the phone, all right? So what is this child communicating through the behavior? I would say if I was flailing my arms in the air, I don't want to go to bed. Or thinking about looking at the consequences, I want to watch TV. Or she could be communicating, I want to spend more time with mom. So there's a lot of consequences happening here. So we don't know exactly what the child is communicating. We could only just give those 3 guesses, and it could be multiple functions. It could be, I want attention, I want to escape bed, or tangible, I want to watch TV. So a way to be sure that you're getting to the right function, you might ask mom to maybe do one of these and see how the child responds to the consequence. So for example, if I see this happening, mom is in the room and saying, go to bed, and she starts to scream, then I might say, mom, just lay with her in the bed and see, does she stop screaming? Because if she stops screaming when mom lays with her, then we can say it was more about mom's attention because she's still in bed and she's not getting TV. So it was more about mom's attention. If I wanted to test out, okay, maybe it is about the TV. Say she does have a TV in her room. If she's, I would then turn the TV on and tell mom to leave the room. So then if she stays in bed and watches TV, then we know it was more a tangible function. She just wanted access to the TV. And then lastly, if it's more about just not being in bed, she could be, you know, get out of bed. You know, she doesn't have to stay in bed. She could stay in her room. It could be she doesn't want to be in her room. So she does stay in the living room or whatnot, but there's no TV and mom is not in there. So we can say it's more about she just did not want to be in bed. Anything but being in this room right now. So you have to do some of that detective work to really figure out what's happening, because we can't just say it's definitely this function based on this one scenario. So you have to have those conversations, and you have to ask those questions to really determine, is it escape? Is it tangible? Is it attention? Or is it a combination of 2 or 3 of those functions? All right. So here you guys are going to practice with the polling. Dr. Graybell, I don't mind doing it again. So you're going to tell me, what is the antecedent? What's the behavior? What's the consequence? What is she communicating? And what is the function? All right, so let's see how this works. I'm going to launch the polling. I'm going to give you guys some more time. You have the 4 questions here, or 5 questions. So what is the antecedent? What is the behavior? What is the consequence? What does the child appear to be communicating? And what is the function? So take a few minutes to answer those questions, please. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. Okay, you guys have about 1 more minute. All right, 5 more seconds. Best guess if you're not sure. All right. So let's see what you guys answered. We're gonna take a break shortly. I know we're an hour and a half in, and then we'll finish up at 12. So here we go. So what is the antecedent? 100% of you guys said mom walks in and places a matching task in front of the child. Excellent. Behavior, what is the target behavior? So remember, we want that observable, measurable behavior. What is the child doing? Child screams and waves arms. All right, that is what the child is doing, and B. 3, what is the consequence? How did mom respond? She took away the pictures and walks away. What does the child appear to be communicating through that behavior of screaming and waving her arms? I don't want to do this. So then we can say the function. If she's saying, I don't want to do this, that means I want to escape, and the function is escape. Okay, so great job on that, guys. I'm going to stop sharing. And that's really good practice. I had a video that I would want you guys to look at to take ABC data, but we're getting short on time. I want to be sure that you guys get all the information that you need. So what I want to do is just stop right here. We're gonna take a break. And then when we get back, we'll walk through filling out the BB Quip. We're gonna take about 10 minutes break. So right now it's 10:43. So if you can come back at 10:53, we're going to start back up with the BB Quip and filling that out. Thank you guys. Okay, it is 10:53. So we're gonna go ahead and just walk through the BB Quip. Let me get to that part of my, there we go. All right, so this is where we stopped last time. So we're just gonna go through the antecedents, the consequences, and the slow triggers. So at what times does hitting his head with his hand most likely to occur? So I'm gonna say it usually happens between 8 and 10. And then if I wanted to do like 3 to 5, then I would hit control, hold it down, and then drag it. Okay. Then hitting his head with his hand is more likely to occur when, these are the slow triggers. So I would say when feeling hungry or thirsty and left alone for a long period of time and experiencing an unexpected change in routine. So with this is not only home-based, but this can also be for teachers in the school environment as well. Again, you're not limited to just these options, there's an other. So go ahead and fill that in if none of these apply to the student. Hitting head with his hand is least likely to occur. This is important because we need to know when does it not happen, who does it not happen with. So I would say this does not happen when Legos, and parents. The following seem to occur immediately before hitting his head with his hand. We're gonna say that it's when he's told no, told to wait, and when a preferred item is taken away. But you have some attention type antecedents, like when positive attention is given to the child. So some kids don't like to get that attention. When adults are talking to others, when they're completing a task or an activity. Actually, for the purpose of, no, I'm gonna do this one because this is happening too. More of a transition thing, but we can also say when completing a task or activity. So say it is multiple things. So it's going to list out the ones that you chose, and then you can pick the one antecedent that happens most often. It might be hard to do that, so you can potentially list out a couple, but it's for the purposes of this, it's helpful to pick one, but don't feel like you have to. So I'm gonna say it most happens when, or I can even say denied access to, or no, I'm gonna say told to transition away from. All right, so common consequences. So when this student is told to transition away from playing or toys, I'm gonna say from playing. How do others typically respond? So again, it could be the adults, siblings, peers. So you wanna make sure that you're identifying how are people responding to this behavior. And there might be a lot of responses happening at this point. So some, when he's hitting, remember, and he's hitting his head with his hand. So this is the behavioral focus. So when this happens, you know, talking to the parent, they might say an alternative preferred item or activity is presented. They might send the child to the room to calm down. They might give some negative verbal attention. They might try to physically guide the child to stop engaging in the behavior. They might withdraw the request to transition. So remember, it's told to transition away from playing. They might just talk to him. So they might be doing a lot, right? And again, you can type in anything specific here. So this lists out the different things that's happening. But what you want to do is figure out what's the one consequence. You can ask the parents, you know, what's the one thing that happens most often after the behavior occurs, right? So when he hits his head after you say, time to stop playing, you know, for whatever reason, how do others typically respond? And we can say they start listing out some different activities that the child can do instead. And then who typically responds by offering an alternative preferred item or activity? Usually the adults do. How does the child typically react to the consequent, I cannot say consequence. So how do they typically react to this? So we can say, and this is the child, how do they react to this consequence? So this is important. So remember I was talking about the behavior stopping. So when you think about a crying baby, a baby can only cry when they want to communicate, when they need something. And as a parent, we would go through the necessary steps to try to figure out what this child is communicating through the crying. And the way that we would discover that we got the message right, so say they're hungry and they're communicating that they're hungry by crying, and you feed them, the child is going to stop crying because you met that need. On the flip side of that, if they're hungry and you change their diaper, the baby's going to continue to cry. So because that need is not met, and they're going to continue to communicate that need through the crying until you get it right. So when you think about the consequence of, most of the time you offer an alternative preferred item or activity, we can say, you know what, that usually stops the behavior most of the time, because as the parent is able to identify, I know I can give them something else, another tangible item, and they're going to stop engaging in the behavior. It may be that they do give an alternative item, but that child wants that particular item that they're playing with. And we could say the behavior continues most of the time. So even though I'm giving alternatives, they continue to hit their head, right? But the most important, and intensifies, of course, is if the behavior gets worse. The most important piece, though, is the stopping. Even if I selected continues, right? So if I offer an alternative preferred item or activity and the behavior continues, that means that that item or activity is not meeting that need. So if I was to say, okay, when the student engages in hitting his head with his hand, which of the following statements is mostly true? Allowing the child to escape, avoid, or delay the unwanted task, activity, place, or person would most likely stop. So it's not about a task, right? It's about transitioning away from toys. So that's not it. Giving the child attention or reacting to the behavior would most likely stop and or reduce the frequency, duration, or intensity of the behavior. It's not about my attention either, because they're getting my attention because I'm telling them to transition away from the toys, right? Giving access to the preferred item or activity would most likely stop and or reduce. So I would say that if I said, okay, fine, you can play a little bit longer, then that would more than likely stop the behavior. Then that is mostly true. It's not necessarily that it's the consequence that I'm doing most often, but I can think about it, and you can help your parents think about, even though you may not give in, quote unquote, because that's really what it is. It's more of, if I was to give this child what they wanted, what would meet that need? That's what this question is asking. If you were to meet that need, what would you have to do? Would you have to give them that activity? Would you have to tell them, you know, okay, no, you don't have to do it? Would you just have to give them some extra love and attention? Or this one is for the sensory, right? This is blocking the behavior seems to be the only way to stop or reduce the frequency, duration, or intensity of the behavior because the behavior itself is reinforcing. So I can only stop nail biting or hand flapping if I physically stop it or give them something else to keep them busy, because they would just continue to engage in that behavior anyway, right? So I'm gonna say giving access to that item is most likely to stop or reduce the behavior. So this This is for you guys to continue to use because you can copy and paste this summary below. This is everything that I just filled in, or most of everything I just filled in with you guys over the last few minutes, right? So this is, he's hitting his head with his hand. It's most likely to occur when he's feeling hungry or thirsty or left alone or experiencing an unexpected change in the routine. It's least likely to occur when he's playing with his Legos and engaging with peers and parents. The antecedent is he's told to transition away from playing, and adults typically respond by offering an alternative preferred item or activity, and as a result, hitting his head with his hand continues most of the time. And then that last question was, it is possible that giving access to the preferred item or activity would most likely stop the behavior. So you can copy and paste this, like I could just copy and paste this and send it over to someone, to the parent who's familiar with this. I mean, of course, they're familiar with this, the child. I can also send this to another team member who's familiar with the child to really see, okay, is this what's really happening? And if not, then you can always go back. You don't hit the back button, but you hit this arrow and you can change your answers, and you'll see that your answers are changed here, okay? So you don't feel like you're stuck with this. You can always go back and edit later. So what do you think JS might be communicating by hitting his head with his hand? Select the statement that seems to be true most often. So with this in mind, with everything in mind, what do I think he's communicating through the head hitting? So I would say it's more of a tangible function. So I'm going down to the tangible. JS appears to be communicating, I want access to this preferred item or activity. I don't want to stop doing this preferred activity. I want that preferred item or activity back, or I don't want to wait to get access to this preferred item or activity. So the mostly true is I don't want to stop doing this preferred activity. The function of the behavior is tangible, okay? So this leads me to the motivation assessment scale. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this. If you click here, I'm not going to click because I don't want to get off of this screen, but it will take you to the website to get access to the motivation assessment scale. I'm going to show you guys what that looks like in the PowerPoint. But if you completed this, then you would put the scores in here. And I will explain it now, but then I will orient you guys to that in a few seconds. So I'm going to just put NA because we did not complete the motivation assessment scale for this BB Quip. All right, so I'm gonna continue. All right, so this is getting to my next part, and I think I did not follow my directions as to where to stop. Oh, I went too far. Sorry, I got too excited. So you guys were supposed to stop with the who typically responds by offering an alternative preferred item or activity, but I will start orienting you to all the things that we just talked about shortly, okay? So we're into the prevention piece, but this is not going to be our function-specific preventions just yet. We're going to talk about those tier 1 levels of support and those general prevention strategies as well. You want to also check in to make sure that they understand the requests or expectations. Preempt the challenging behavior by prompting the appropriate behavior or social skills, by reminding them of what the expectations are. And then a prevention strategy that you can use, especially for the younger kids, and not even younger. You can also use it for any age, or like the visual supports. You just want to make sure that they're age appropriate. So I'm going to say that some of these are more the younger kids that we're going to be talking about here, of course, right? So first then, remember the first then is more making that predictability. So first you can do this, and then you can go outside. So first clean up, then go outside. This helps a lot with transitions, especially when it comes to like that tangible or the escape. You can also break the schedule down into smaller steps as well. So if it's a long day or a lengthy task, breaking it down makes it a lot easier to manage. So first you color cut and glue, and then you can play a game on the computer. Okay, so first, then, if, then, always is a really good strategy to use. You can use visual supports in this way, where you say you show a picture, first you do this, and then you eat. First you do your magnetic numbers, and then you can play ball bounce, all right? Sometimes you can just write in what it is, if it's a student that can read, so you don't necessarily need pictures, but just having that first then would be helpful, and writing in the words. This is just a good strategy for parents to make it clear with the boundaries at home. So this is more of a school example of you stay over on this side, they stay over on this side, but also this is a big, the TV and being close to the TV. If you have a tape on the ground and then have all the fun things behind the tape, then they might be more likely to stay behind that boundary, and you don't have to worry about the parent having to say, get away from the TV, you're too close, you're too close. Having that visual boundary could be helpful. Schedules and routines, so you can develop a schedule that promotes child engagement and success. So you want to balance those active activities and the quiet activities, but then you also want to be sure that there's adult directed activities, but then also child directed, because a lot of children thrive with having some of that control, in that if they're directing kind of the activity and you're still getting the work done, it doesn't matter who's directing it, right? And sometimes you can have more success if the child is in the lead. So that's where you give them a little bit more of the control and give them choices as far as what they want to do at that particular time. And you want to be sure that there's a clear beginning, middle, and end to activities, just so that children can know what's coming next. Again, that predictability. And then you can tell parents to teach the schedule, because sometimes we just put the schedule up and expect them to do it, but we have to teach the students what to do during that time. Establish that routine and try to follow it as consistently as possible. I know it may be hard during this time, but try to see if you can support your parents in establishing the routine and following it. Teach the expectations of each routine. So within the day, there's different routines that may have to be taught, and you have to break down the expectations for what does digital learning time looks like. When you have free time, what are the expectations during that time? When you're outside playing, what are the expectations and what does that look like? All right, so making sure that's clear. When changes are necessary, prepare the child ahead of time. So making sure that parents know that they have to let the kids know if there's something different. So if they get an email from a teacher that says, oh, we're doing a Zoom classroom, and really have a very specific schedule for that student. It just depends on what it is. Here's some different examples of what schedules look like. So now this is really fancy and printed out and everything. This was just written and there's some pictures drawn on it. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy and laminated. It could just be written down, okay? These are some other routines. So like hand washing, breaking it down into smaller steps so that they know what's expected during that particular time. So these are more daily living skills, but this can also be for any sort of activity that has multiple steps. Here's another example. It's pretty fancy, right? So this is the student's schedule, and then they have their first then board, and then they have their different reinforcers in the bins here. So there's different ways that we can do it. And this is just saying that we all use some sort of visual schedule. So some people may use their phone calendars. They might write down in a planner what's going on, or they might follow more the calendar like on their email or Outlook or whatnot. So just know that visuals are supports that we put in place and from all ages. So if we need these things as an adult and as educators how can we support our students in having those visual schedules and reminders as well. Transition cues are very helpful, especially during this time, and having parents make sure that they are giving those warnings and cues ahead of time. Sometimes it's rough when you just kind of snatch the toy out of a child's hand and says, okay, playtime is over. You know, giving that warning ahead of time could be helpful to just prepare them that my playtime is going to be over. All right. So you can give them an auditory warning, like you have 5 more minutes. It could be paired with an object or a picture. It orients the child as to what's happening instead of just catching them off guard. It acts as a reminder of what is coming next. So in 5 minutes, we're going to be doing whatever the case may be. So it's going to be time to clean up soon, okay? Helps the child to go from one location to another. That predictability is very helpful, and just that sense of control instead of, again, being caught off guard, and just eliminates the dead time as well between transitions. Here are some timers that we can use that can be helpful as warnings. Whenever I work with parents, I try to tell them to make sure to not use the timer only for bad things coming up or non-preferred things coming up. For example, you don't want it to always be, I'm setting the timer and it's time to stop playing. And then when the timer goes off, you have to clean up. When the timer goes off, you have to come do your work. Because when you say timer, or when they hear the timer, then that's going to become aversive within itself. And you just say the word timer, and then you see challenging behavior occurs because they associate it with bad things. So you want to be sure that you use the timer, and you tell parents to use the timer for good things as well. So in 5 minutes, you get to take a break. When the timer goes off, we can eat some ice cream, okay? So just being sure that you are especially if they're able to do that. So for our 3rd and 4th and 5th graders, even younger than that, they can be a part of establishing the routine. But just make sure that you can use this website, this resource, and you can share this resource with families, because it kind of outlines some family routine guides for like getting ready in the morning, for bath time, getting dressed, so on and so forth. So if you feel like this is something that would be helpful for them, you can definitely share that. And we'll be sure that we share the links in the chat for you as well. I teach self-contained EBD and have a son on the autism spectrum in my life. Yes, timers are very, very important. I know when we do the Parent Academy for parents, and they just implement the timer, and they're like, I haven't had any issues. And I'm like, awesome. So it's timers can be very, very helpful. But again, it's only helpful if you use it for both good things, preferred and non-preferred, because if it's just for non-preferred, it's going to be very aversive. All right. So behavior intervention plan. So this is where we're transitioning into the prevention and the replacement, which is function specific. So again, before you write the plan, you must know why the behavior is happening. So with your hypothesis statements, this is helpful, and this is kind of where I jumped the gun a little bit in the BB Quip, where we're getting to the hypothesis statement, because it helps to summarize the triggers. So remember, I showed you the summary of the triggers, what the antecedents were, when the behavior was likely to happen, where it was least likely to happen, but then also what were the consequences to those behaviors, and then outlines that function. So this is what I was going over with you guys. So Gabriella, this is kind of just an overall summary of all the ABC data that was collected. And this is just a hypothesis summary here. So the context is typically when she's playing in the room with toys, and it's time to start digital learning assignments. And then the antecedent is mom says, come to the table. And the behavior is she yells, screams, and kicks toys most of the time, right? So this is a summary of all the observations. The maintaining consequence, that means the behavior that happens most of the time and results in the behavior stopping is typically when mom gives her 5 more minutes of playtime, okay? So we can conclude or hypothesize mostly that it's a tangible function because this is the maintaining consequence, but it could also be escape, that I don't want to go to the table to do my assignments, right? So we're going to choose one for the purposes of the BB Quip and just working towards function-based interventions. So we're just going to focus on tangible, but if it's both, you can have interventions in place for both tangible and escape, okay? So this is a hypothesis statement or summary. So when playing with toys in bedroom or in playroom and prompted to transition to other activities, whether it's schoolwork or mealtime, for example, Gabriella engages in a tantrum, which is defined as yelling, screaming, or kicking at toys. When this occurs, adults usually respond by giving her more time to play. As a result, the behavior stops. Gabriella is communicating, I want to play with my toys longer, and the function of the behavior is tangible, okay? So that summed up everything that has been going on with Gabriella. So this is kind of what you want to work towards with your families so that they can get a good summary of what's happening and can transition into getting some good strategies in place to prevent those behaviors from happening, and then also a replacement behavior. If you're not sure about the hypothesis though, you just think a little bit more or ask about, well, what would cause the behavior to stop? If you may not be doing this, mom or dad, but if you were to quote unquote give in to the behavior in this moment, what would stop it? What would reduce it? And if they're like, well, if I picked him up and hugged him right now, that's typically what would stop it from happening because I know he wants my attention. And we can say the function is attention, right? So it's just having those conversations and working through that to get to that function. If you're still not sure, you can collect more data or ask the parent to collect a little bit more data if you taught them how to do the ABC data collection piece. But then you can also do the motivation assessment scale. So this is why it didn't make sense that I was showing you guys that just yet. So the motivation assessment scale, or the MAS, is a 16-item questionnaire that helps you better understand why someone is doing what they're doing. And it's designed to help identify which motivators reinforce the challenging behaviors. So it helps you to inform strategies to reduce and prevent the challenging behavior for sure. So here's just kind of a screenshot of what the MAS looks like. So when I do this with families, I make sure to do it as more of an interview so they know exactly what it is that I'm asking for. So if it's the behavior description, for example, is hitting head. So with my JS example, so if JS is hitting his head, I'm going to ask the parents, so would JS hit his head continuously over and over if he was left alone for long periods of time? So would he just be in a room hitting his head with no one around? So that's what I typically like rephrase it and give a specific example for that behavior that they're experiencing so that they answer the question more accurately. So they would probably say, no, never. He wouldn't just be in the room hitting his head by himself. Perfect. Okay. Does he hit his head? Does he hit his head after you asked him to do a difficult task? So if he has a hard time tying his shoes, would he typically hit his head during that time? And I would say, no, never. He'll just work through it. He might whine, but he would never hit his head. Okay, great. Does the behavior seem to occur in response to you talking to other persons in the room? No, he doesn't care for my attention at all. Okay, so that would be never. Does the behavior ever occur to get a toy, food, or activity that he's been told that he cannot have? Will he hit his head then? Yes, almost always. Anytime I tell him it's time to transition away from toys, he hits his head. So then I would check almost always. So this screenshot, there's 16 questions. So it goes through all 16 questions, but at the end you score it. And you see it has the different functions that we talked about, the sensory, escape, attention, and tangible. So what you do is if they scored never for these three, I'm gonna put what you guys will see from my example, that intangible, you would see that most of the points fall under this column, and these are all zeros. Or escape might be a little bit elevated, you know, he might have a score of 5 there, but overall it's the highest score is tangible, okay? So that's kind of where I was leading you guys through, right? So you guys already saw this piece. So the hypothesis statement and function. How does the child typically react? Having the summary here, and then concluding or hypothesizing that function. So let me just go back to my BB Quip so I can reorient you to that. So you remember where I was talking about the MAS here. So say I did fill it out. No, it's not sensory at all. Yes, there's a little bit of escape. No attention, he will not hit his head to get my attention, but heck yeah, this will happen when I try to deny or if he has to wait for an available item. Okay. And I'm rushing through a little bit now because we're done at 12 and I want to be sure that you guys get through everything. So here, the summary, I shared it with somebody else. They agree with me. We talked about it, right? And me, I'm GRF, and I and at least one other person agree that the function of hitting his head with his hand is to get access to tangible. So I just kind of review my summary again. And based on all this information, yes, I agree. It is tangible. If you read through this and it's not really lining up, again, go back, look, review your questions, review your answers, talk to the parent, get some more details, because once you select the function here, it's going to take you to the function-specific function-specific prevention, interventions, and replacement. So because I hit tangible, JS engages in hitting his head with his hand because he wants what? And I know he wants toys, he wants those electronic devices, activities. So it's usually transition from these particular things. Everything else, not really, doesn't really apply. Oh, but yeah, he wants to keep engaging in an activity and to keep playing with his toys, okay? So you just click through and see, what does this child want? All right? So this, I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint because this is gonna take me to function-specific prevention strategies, okay? So we're gonna go through a few, but the BB Quip gives you a few of them that you can choose from. Again, don't feel like you have to pick what's here. These are just options. It says you can copy and paste, but you can type in exactly what that's gonna look like, what is gonna fit for that family. If you need that family to use an if-then statement, you don't wanna leave it blank here. You wanna say, if you clean up, then you can have whatever, whatever. So you wanna be sure that you're giving them specific strategies and not keeping it too vague so that they can read the plan and implement it as written. But this is a section that you wanna do with the family because you wanna be sure that you're providing strategies that they're willing to do, that is feasible in their environment, because there's no point in putting something in place. And it's the same with a behavior intervention plan in a school setting. You don't want to necessarily just pick and choose for the teachers and then they're like, but I can't even do this, right? So it has to be a team-based approach, okay? So I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint to just orient you guys to some function-specific interventions. I'm not gonna go into many of these in details, but just know that the BB Quip will give you most of these options, right? And that you can choose from, or you can kind of jog your brain and see like, oh, I never thought of that, or, oh, this is something else that I could do. So just know that these are different interventions that you can use that are for escape. So pairing the unwanted tasks, so making it fun, showing or modeling what the child should do, break the task into smaller steps, offer choices of the activity, use a visual to show the child what they should be doing during that time, shorten the length of the task, and increase the duration over time, use that timer again. It's, you know, it's really helpful. You know, you have to just work on this for the next 10 minutes, and when the timer goes off, you can take a break, right? That's an escape function, prevention, intervention. That's a mouthful. Okay, so you can do an easier task first and then a more difficult task. So you can start with the easy things and then kind of transition into the more difficult. Use a visual schedule to prepare for transitions between activities. And then again, just going back to that instructions, making sure that you're stating those instructions clearly and not as questions. When it comes to attention, some prevention things that you can do if they're wanting your attention. We're busy. The parents are busy working while their children are trying to engage with them. We can try to schedule specific times throughout the day where attention is available. We can try to give extra attention throughout the day before the behavior occurs. Make items available when adult attention is removed. So if I know, if you know that the parent is going to be busy for 2 hours, making sure that the child has something that they can engage in for at least an hour or two, depending on the age. You might have to break it down where you schedule 15-minute stops in that 2-hour time frame for that parent so they can check in with their child every 15 minutes. Again, it's just about how can I give the attention up front so they don't have to come to me to get it by engaging in challenging behavior. You can use a visual cue to show when attention is available and not available. And again, use a timer to prepare child for when attention is not available or when it will be available again. For tangible, we can offer some different toys or activities before removing a preferred item. So I pretty much talk about like trading. So instead of just saying, okay, done with this one, I can give 2 choices and say, hey, it's time to do something else. Would you like to do this fun activity or this fun activity? So they're not focused on you taking away the activity that they're doing at that moment. Use that timer again. It's helpful. Offer choices. Use a visual schedule so that they know when things are available a little bit later. So yes, computer time may not be available right now, but I know after I do these 2 activities, I see it comes next. That first then board is very helpful during this time. So first we do this, and then you get to do your fun activity, okay? Allow access to items throughout the day, and then use a visual cue to show when the preferred item is available and when it's unavailable. And a big one is out of sight, out of mind. So if you know that there's certain things that are just not available or you're not wanting to give them access to it, instead of having it just in sight, just hide it, lock it up somewhere, put it in your room, you know? And parents sometimes don't think of that, like they should just accept that it's not available even if it's out, but why deal with the challenging behavior that may come with that? So just make it out of sight, and if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and they're less likely to ask for it, and then you won't have to say no. And then sensory and automatic, these are a little bit harder to prevent because you don't really know exactly what's reinforcing about the behavior itself. But some things you can do is just kind of presenting some competing activities or items, or trying to find some toys or activities that provide a similar type of stimulation. So like if a child really likes to see things spin, but they're spinning all types of things that aren't meant to be used in that way, then we can give them some fidget spinners and some spinny toys or tops that are appropriate to spin, but it's not appropriate to spin your cars on the roof, you know, the play cars or whatever. So it's just little things like that. But again, it's one of those things where you pick your battles when it comes to sensory. Is it something that we really need to intervene with? All right. You can also establish specific times of day when the behavior is allowed and when it's not. So I know my sensory behavior again is like playing with my hair. So because you guys can't see me, I know that I can engage in the behavior just fine. It's available, it's allowed. But if you guys could see me right now, or if I was in front of the room, I know that playing with my hair is not available or not quote unquote allowed because it's just not appropriate, socially appropriate in that setting. And then you can use a visual as well. All right, so let's go to, you guys did this or saw this already, but let me get to where I am selecting a behavior or a prevention strategy for this behavior. So the most common antecedent, he's told to transition away from playing, and the function is to access tangibles. He wants toys, electronic devices, activities, and he wants to keep engaging in the activity and to keep playing with the toys. So what can I do to prevent the head hitting from happening? I can, let's see, if it's more of a transition away from things, I can use a warning, right? So I can just copy and paste this for now because I can provide a warning when items will be removed or when activities are ending by using, so I have some examples here, but I'm gonna say by using a timer at 10 minutes and at 5 minutes. And then I want to also, I will also, or I don't want to say also, I will give give JS 3 choices of other activities or items that. All right, so those 2 things, I'm going to provide a warning when items will be removed or when activities are ending by using a timer at 10 minutes and at 5 minutes. And I'm going to give JS 3 choices of other activities or items that he can have. All right, so those are my tangible, maintained, function-specific prevention strategies for JS for his head-hitting behavior when he's told to transition away from toys. All right, there's other things that can be used, but that's something that me and the parent has talked about, and it's something that she's tried and has said that it's been successful in the past, and she's just kind of admitted that it's something that she hasn't been consistent with. So this is just a reminder as mom, you've been doing a really good job. You found something that works, keep doing it because, you know, it's working. All right. So then this then transitions me to the replacement behaviors. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint just to orient you guys to replacement because we want out with the old, right? We don't want that challenging behavior to occur anymore. We want to replace it with something more appropriate. So I'm just going to read through this quote really quickly. Some of you may already be familiar with this quote. It's a very popular quote. If a child does not know how to read, what do? We teach. If the child does not know how to swim, we teach. If they don't know how to multiply, we teach. Or how to drive, we teach. If a child does not know how to behave, do we teach them how to behave appropriately, or do we punish or discipline, right? So it's a little bit, we want to be sure that we're teaching replacement behaviors, and that's where we're leading to, all right? So if you teach a new way of communicating wants or needs, then there will be no need to engage in the challenging behaviors. So we're out with the old, out with those challenging behaviors. Here are some examples of those challenging behaviors that could occur to escape, right? So mom tells Allison to go to the bathroom or put her socks on. She throws her toys and she hits mom's leg, and what happens? She doesn't have to put her socks on because she's put in timeout, and she gets escaped from picking up her, or she gets escaped from going to the bathroom because she's told to clean up her toys, right? So an alternative, something that we can teach Allison instead is, can I have a break, or can I do that later? Just depending on what the skill level of the child is, you want to determine what that replacement behavior is. You also want to determine what are other kids their age doing. You know, something that may seem, oh, this is a great idea to have them do this random replacement behavior because that should work. But we want to keep in mind, what are other kids doing to get that escape? You know, what are they saying? Can I have a break? Are they saying, I need 5 more minutes? Or are they saying, oh, please, not right now, whatever the case may be, right? But you want to be sure that it's something that the replacement behavior is something that will get rewarded when they engage in the behavior, and that it's something that is appropriate across settings as well, right? So attention, same type of example here. These are the inappropriate behaviors to get attention, and it's gotten attention, but instead I can tap mom on the shoulder. I can say, excuse me, but we want to make sure if he taps mom on the shoulder or if he says, excuse me, that mom immediately gives that attention, because he knows or has learned that if I scream or hit your leg, I'm going to get attention right away. So we have to make sure that replacement behavior results in the same thing. Same for tangible, all right? So I think you guys get the pattern here already. Behavior, the challenging behavior. So Robert screams while reaching for a toy. Mom gives him the toy. Robert begins kicking the front seat. Remember, he gets McDonald's. So instead of engaging in this challenging behavior, maybe he is non-vocal. We're going to teach him to touch a picture card, right? For toys, for McDonald's, for whatever the case may, whatever it is that he may want, we will create a picture for him to touch or exchange a picture to communicate what he wants. And then mom is going to be sure, and others are going to be sure to give him access when he engages in the replacement behavior. Okay. So replacement skills and behaviors are skills that make the challenging behavior unnecessary. It has to fulfill the same purpose as the challenging behavior. So if I am engaging in challenging behavior to get your attention, the replacement behavior has to result in getting your attention. If I'm engaging in challenging behavior to delay or avoid a task or instruction, then if you're teaching a replacement behavior to ask for a break or wanting more time, then you have to be sure that you give that time or you give that break. So if they ask for a break and then you give them a token and say, thanks for asking for a break, keep working, then they're going to start engaging in challenging behavior to delay that task. So it's not about getting praise necessarily for escape. It's about getting that escape or getting that break. Okay, so just making sure that matches. And then you want to be sure that you're telling parents that they're replacing the behavior or replacing the challenging behavior with something that's going to require less effort. So if they have to work harder to engage in the replacement behavior, but it's easy to fall to the floor and cry and get what I want, then they're probably going to continue to fall to the floor and cry. But if you're saying, all you have to do is tap me on the shoulder and I'll pay attention, then that's easy peasy. And they'll more likely do that than falling on the floor crying for 45 minutes, okay? This is an essential part of the BIP with the replacement skills, because the need is still there. So it's not just about the prevention, it's really about teaching how they can get their needs met in a more appropriate way. Here is, it's hard to hear this, but I want to just show you guys the difference between when mom has started implementing some prevention strategies based on the function, how this transition into the library has been very different. So as you can see, it's a very different interaction now. Mom had her visual supports. It's obviously she did some sort of first then type strategy, like first we'll go in. She might have paired that little toy activity with, you know, that might have been a fun activity. So she oriented him to that ahead of time so she could have discussions with him before the library, like, hey, remember, we have that toy that we want to play with in the library. And after you play with that, then we can pick out some books, right? So just having those supports in place prevented the meltdown in front of the library that we just saw a few slides ago. Okay, so when we're teaching new skills, again, it has to be taught, and some of you guys may already know how to teach this. Now with the virtual stuff and trying to teach parents how to teach new skills, it's a little bit harder. So just remember that they will have to prompt, right? And you have to prompt them how to prompt through some things. So some of this stuff will have to be more shown in person. Like you might have to open up your video and show them how to do it because we have to be socially distant. So just making sure that you are orienting the parents to prompt through things. We can't just assume that the child will automatically do the new skill just because we've come up with it and chose it. We have to prompt them. And some kids, controlling prompts may be a physical prompt where you might have to hand over hand physically guide them. Their controlling prompt might be imitation, where you just have to show them what to do and then they will do the correct thing. So you just have to know what is the skill level of that child and what is their controlling prompt and what are they going to get. If I prompt them this way, they're going to get the response correct 99.9% of the time. If you feel like you are trying to model or imitate what it is and they're not following that model, then please go ahead and try to do something more hand over hand, but nothing too intrusive, because there's some individuals or kids that do not like that physical guidance. So it's just talking to the parent and thinking, talking through which prompt level would be most appropriate to get the response that we're looking for. Now, the hierarchy that we usually prompt through is what we call most to least prompting hierarchy or errorless teaching, especially if this is a brand new skill. So again, this is talking to the parent about which prompt level would be most appropriate. So some kids may not know the skill at all and can't do it and will need all the help up front, and then you can fade or remove the amount of help to an independent, or vice versa, where you could see this flipped and you might start with an independent opportunity because you know or you've seen them do it and they just need some reminders, okay? So we just focus on the teaching new skills with the errorless teaching because most of the time we're teaching a brand new skill. But if it's not a brand new skill, please by all means be sure that you are giving them the independent opportunity, just reminding them what they need to say and then giving more help as needed, all right? So here, you first do your maximum help, all the help, but it's the controlling prompt. So if I just need to start with a model prompt and that's all the help that I need to give, I will start there. And then I could fade to a more verbal prompt. So I might just model it and then I might just say what it is that you need to do. And then I can fade to a independent opportunity because this is the ultimate goal. We want to be sure that they are, that the child or the student is engaging in that replacement behavior independently without help, okay? So here, this is where it gets a little bit more detailed. So I'm not gonna spend too much time showing you guys this because what is gonna happen is you're gonna go through it and then you're gonna get a nice little printout, which I can pull up to show you what that would look like when it's copied and pasted into a Word document. So for time purposes, because it's 11:47, I'm going to skip through this, but this really is going to take you to, as you saw with JS, how can he be taught to access preferred items or activities? He can negotiate for more time potentially, right? So it just depends, again, what is feasible, what is the family willing to do? But then we also want to think about not rewarding the challenging behavior anymore. So we also have to talk to the parent about, okay, he may still hit himself in the head, right? but we know it's because he wants to play longer with his toys. So we have to be sure that we are not rewarding that head hitting anymore, and we minimize how much reinforcement we're providing. But I would, if you know what extinction is, I would not necessarily tell the parent to completely stop if they are used to rewarding the behavior, because the behavior will get worse. And especially with this behavior of physically hurting himself or hitting his head, we definitely don't want to suggest parents just completely not engaging in that behavior or with that behavior, because it can go up to like a level 10 or 20, and we don't want parents to feel overwhelmed trying to work through worsening behaviors because of an extinction burst. Okay, we can, again, we'll have our office hours. If this is something that you want to talk through, we can definitely help with that. Okay, so taking the show on the road. So all this is saying is that we want the new skill to maintain over time. So if we're teaching this new skill, we want to be sure we won't have to reinforce it every single time anymore. So when you're first teaching it, yes, we're going to reinforce it every single time that they use the skill, even if we prompt it, because we want them to know this is what you do instead of the challenging behavior. But over time, we're going to want to fade that out and make it more realistic. So we want to be sure that that new skill is maintaining over time. You want to build on skills that they already have. So if you teach skills, again, if they can imitate, use that to your advantage. Use that model prompt to your advantage. Or if they echo or vocally imitate everything you say, that is a great way to teach a child how to request things instead of using challenging behavior. But you can't just say, use your words, because if they could use their words and they had the words to say, they would. And apparently they're not using it in certain situations. So give them the words to say. And the best time to teach the behavior or teach the replacement or the new skill is not when they're engaging in the challenging behavior. Because if you're upset, and as a person, individual, if you're upset about something and you are having a tantrum, right, you are not going to be open to someone saying, say, I want cookie, say, please. We're not listening to that. At that point, they are not open to learning. So we want to be sure that we are teaching these skills outside of the moment and practicing. And that's kind of what the BB Quip kind of takes you through. Like, when is the best time to teach it? Who is the best person to teach the skill? Excuse me. Who is the best person? Because sometimes dad may not have a really great positive interaction with the child, and that's okay. It happens. He might be more of the disciplinarian, but mom has a great interaction, or maybe the parents don't and the grandparent does, right? So I would say the grandmom may be the best person to teach it, because the child has a good rapport with that, with their grandparent, and they're open to learning just about anything. But then others are still practicing with the child, but grandma's the main person really teaching it. Okay, generalization is really about making sure that the student is not just using that replacement behavior with just the person who was teaching it. So we want to be sure that we're teaching across multiple people, across settings, and you can also see across behaviors. So I'm going to give some examples of generalization. So we taught we taught the child to say, hi, grandma, hi, dad, or just hi, right? But only with grandma and dad. But the child starts to say hi to mom and siblings without specifically teaching them with mom and the siblings. So that's what we call generalization. So we taught with those two specific people, but then we saw that the child naturally started to say hi to other people. Across settings just means that at school, say you have an intervention already in place, right, for challenging behavior at school, and you want to see if that will generalize. Sometimes you might see that, okay, we taught the child that the stop sign on the computer means that it's unavailable. So mom, how about you try putting the stop sign? You're saying that the behavior is happening when he's told to transition off the computer or when it's not available. put the stop sign up and see if that works for you at home. So then when she starts putting the sign up on the computer, then the child's no longer engaging in challenging behavior because that intervention has generalized to the home setting without mom having to specifically practice it or teach it. Generalization is not automatic, unfortunately. So sometimes kids do have to be taught in different settings with different people so that it generalizes easier. So don't assume that you can just say to mom, "Oh, put a stop sign up," and he'll do it, because he may not. And then if it does not generalize, then you will have to talk through how to teach that skill to the student, for that parent to teach their child how you did it in the school environment. And then across behaviors, the child is taught to raise his or her hand to get the teacher's attention instead of cursing in class. But then you also see that the child stops yelling out answers and raises his or her hand instead. So you did not specifically target yelling out answers, because that wasn't like the primary behavior. The target behavior was really the cursing to get attention. But then you notice, oh, he wants to get my attention to answer questions and he's yelling out. But instead of yelling out now, without me teaching, he's raising his hand. That behavior has generalized across other behaviors as well. Okay, so talked about this already. So you must teach generalization, and you teach it by providing different examples across different people, using different instructions. So you don't want to get stuck on saying the same instruction the same way, because then the child will not understand if you change up your instructions. So for example, if you say, "Clean up your toys, clean up your toys, clean up your toys," and then you change it up to say, "Hey, can you straighten up?" They're not going to understand straighten up, right? And that's not really specific enough either, but that's just an example. If you say, "Point to this, point to the frog, point to the dog, point to," they're just focusing on point to and may not be focusing on the whole phrase. So then if you say touch the, or show me the, or where is the, then they're not going to be able to do that because you've only said point to. So that's just an example of using multiple instructions. And then of course, just having teachable moments across the day. It's hard, especially during this time, but just know that parents can be teaching these new skills when it really matters the most, and they don't have to set aside like a perfect time to teach this skill. They can teach it across the day, when they're in the car, when they're at bedtime and they're just talking about it. They can practice and role play. So there's different ways that they can get some practice in. I'm going to skip this just for time purposes. Progress monitoring piece. So in the BB Quip, it will ask you about, who will collect data on the challenging behavior, who will collect data on the replacement behavior. We want to be sure that data, and right now, it may be a whole lot to ask the parents to provide data, but as educators, we may still need that information. So trying to figure out how you can still get your data if you need it, but we also need to be sure that the intervention is effective, and data will help us with that. So if possible, it will be helpful if parents can still track how many times the challenging behavior is happening after interventions in place. So after putting prevention and replacement behaviors in place, how often is challenging behavior happening? I'm teaching this new skill. How often are they using the new skill? But I'm saying frequency, but it can also be duration, just depending on what the behaviors are. The most important piece, and I think you guys know this about the progress monitoring, because we're, you guys are educators. We just have to see how we can get that data, that information, so that the parents know I'm implementing this plan, even though the behavior is still happening, because the behavior will probably still happen, but they can see the little progress along the way, and data does help with that, okay? So the BB Quip will walk you through all of that I just went over. If you have any questions about that, again, you can reach out to us. We're here to support you and support your families, all right? And this is kind of like a little snippet of what you're gonna see once you finish that very last page. You will get a summary of everything. be sure to copy and paste that in a Word document, and then you can change up the formatting and make it look more presentable, but all your information will be in there. And I will show you after I'm done these slides what that looks like. I'm gonna skip this for time, but this is just kind of summing up their whole experience and how effective it was and how they've changed their lives. The last little quote that mom says is like, a day without a tantrum is such a good day. You know, she said that they used to have to do like the first then all the time, and like first this, and then you get popcorn. It was something like very, not just kind of a natural reinforcer, but it was working to prevent the challenging behavior. And now that they've implemented it for months, they're not having to use popcorn anymore as a then, you know, for their child. And they're not really having to use the visual for most things. Some things they still do, but this is important for parents to know that upfront, we may have to do this stuff so that we can prevent and teach some new skills. And then over time, you won't have to work as hard, and you're not engaged, or you're not dealing with challenging behavior either. So it may be a lot of hard work up front, but it'll be worth it in the end. And I think it's helpful to help support them through that and understand that they have their own, parents have all their own demands going on, and they have their own functions of their behaviors where they may want to escape or avoid certain things, okay? So this is just the last little slide here. Just a reminder that this was recorded. We'll share the links with you guys. So if you've missed bits and pieces there, you'll see kind of the whole presentation. We will have some additional sessions later on. So we'll be sure to share that information if you wanted to join us again, or if you wanted to share it with your colleagues. Again, join us for the office hours if you need it. But if you have any questions before the office hours, please feel free to reach out, and we can definitely support you as best as we can. Any questions? I know it's right at 12, so as I pull up the BB Quip summary, I will open it up for anyone that may have questions that wants to type it in, or if they want to unmute. But just know we are done. You're free to go. I want to be sure that we're mindful of your time, but I'm going to pull up the BB Quip just so you can see what that summary looks like. I just stopped sharing for a second because I had to actually pull it up. All right, so this is kind of like a brief summary of what I completed. So you see here, you will get, it's 6 pages, okay? So you will get all the things that you answered, and it will be, you know, to the best of our ability, grammatically correct and everything. But because you have the ability to copy and paste it into a Word document, you can definitely edit it however you want to, space it out, change the font, whatever the case may be. And then this is something that you can share with your families and share with other providers, educators, so on and so forth. So you can have an overall summary of everything that's been happening with this particular student. Okay. All right, I'm looking at the chat to see if there's any questions. Okay, excellent, thank you. Awesome. Okay, I don't see any specific questions, so just reach out if y'all need anything. We're here to support you, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and just take care of yourselves, be safe, and make sure that you're implementing your own prevention strategies so that we can all stay healthy. Have a good one.